Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering in this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please go to the LinkedIn Live video feed, the link to which I've just placed in the chat room. Tonight, our featured guest is Brian Bromberg, a jazz bassist whose latest album, LaFaro, will be the subject of tonight's conversation. Welcome, Brian.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Brian, so tell us about where you come from, how your musical tastes were formed, and why you decided to become a jazz bassist.
Well, that's a whole show right there with those questions. Originally, I'm from Tucson, Arizona. I grew up in the desert. It was beautiful. It was a great place to grow up because it was a small town, but a big enough town to have everything that a big city has. And oddly enough, I played a lot of music growing up. It was fantastic. So I got a chance to play all styles. I played in the orchestra. I played classical music. I played jazz. I played country western. I played pop music. I played everything. You know, it was a great place to grow up and a great way to grow up. I started actually as a drummer. My father was a drummer. My brother's a drummer. So I grew up playing drums and was working professionally as a drummer. When I was 12, 13 years old, I was literally working 4 nights a week as a drummer, which is pretty crazy. In fact, I was so young that when I would play in bars, I could be on stage playing, but on the breaks, I'd have to go outside because I was too young to be inside because they were serving alcohol. So that was an interesting life for a while. But the way the bass came about was I played cello in elementary school and junior high school, and for a completely different musical experience than playing drums. And the cello I love it. It's a gorgeous instrument. I never felt connected to it. And my junior high school orchestra director came up to me one day and he's like, "Hey, Brian, you see that big bass over there? Well, we got a bunch of cello players in the orchestra, but we don't have any bass players. Why don't you go play bass?" And I know that was his way of saying, I don't want to hear you try to saw your cello in half. So why don't you go play bass? I'd rather have one bad bass player than none. And I'm like, bass, this big thing. I don't want to play bass. It's like, come on. So I remember talking to my dad and my brother about it. It's like, yeah, man, you want me to play bass in the orchestra? And they're like, play bass? That's great. We can play together. I'll play drums and we can play jazz. And the next day I became a bass player. So that was it. But the thing that was cool for me was I was a drummer. I had rhythm. I knew rhythm. I didn't know I had melody in me because I wasn't a good enough cello player to play melody. When I played the bass is the perfect combination of rhythm and melody. And I grew really quickly because the whole melodic side of me came out that I didn't even know I had, because I had the rhythm side. So it was amazing because I got really deep into it quickly, practiced all the time, and I fell in love with the instrument, and I was very passionate about it. So that was my life, and I dedicated my life to it literally 15, 16 years old. That was it. That's all I wanted to do.
Okay, let's listen to another track. This is Gloria's Step. Wow. Okay, so wow. Tell us about the idea behind this album, Brian. Tell us about so who is LaFaro? Tell us about this whole why it was important to do this album and what it's really about.
It's funny hearing that, because that's actually Scott LaFaro was the bassist in the classic Bill Evans trio from 1959 to 1961, and he unfortunately tragically was killed in a car accident when he was 25 years old. And that was one of his songs, Gloria's Step. He wrote that for his girlfriend, and it's got really hard chord changes. Just like you were playing it, and I was listening to it. I was just like, oh man, I forgot how hard that song was. I remember when I was a kid, in the jazz groups, we they'd want to play and stuff. I'm like, man, I can't play this. This is like, wait, there's like no way, it's too hard. Um, the record came about from a Japanese record company, King Records, and they asked me to, hey Brian, do a Scott LaFaro trio record, do a tribute to Scott. And I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do that. And they said, well, please, you're one of the only few guys that could do it. I mean, it meant a lot to me that they wanted me to do it, but they're like, you got to do this record. And I said, I'm not sure. I said, let me think about it. And I went back and I started listening to the classic Bill Evans trio with Scott LaFaro playing bass. And it wasn't until I went back and started listening to it again that I realized how much of an influence Scott LaFaro had on my playing as a soloist. Because I'm more like a timekeeper, swinging straight ahead, four on the floor guy. Scott was just like, he was just like an artist, and their whole interplay as a rhythm section in the Bill Evans trio back then was everything was floating, and it was never really like walking bass pocket. It was a whole other thing that really hadn't happened before, which was amazing because no one had done that. But Scott as a soloist on the instrument, no one had heard a bass player play like that ever. He just did things that nobody did. You know, we're talking 1960, 1961. Nobody did that back then. And when I realized that he had that impact on me, I got back to the record label and I said, you know what, I'll do the record, because I realized how much he did influence my soloing and my lyrical playing, you know, and that's how the record came about, because I wasn't going to do it originally, but I'm really, really glad I did. It was a very rewarding project for me to do. I love it.
Wow. And just so to be clear, so this Scott LaFaro, he's kind of this pioneer that whom all bass players look up to. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. You know, especially acoustic jazz bass players, you know, playing upright bass. He 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 was truly gifted and changed the way the instrument was played and how people perceived the bass. So he wasn't just like a really good bass player. He actually changed the perception of the acoustic bass in jazz because of what he was capable of doing as an artist and as a player, with his technique and his ability to play in the upper register, and just things that he did on the instrument that no bass player had really done before. He like paved the way for, you know, Eddie Gomez, Niels Henning Orsted Pedersen, you know, all these guys that you know came after him, that had all the technique and played the lines and the melodic lines and the freedom and all this lyricism. Scott was the first guy I'd ever heard of to do that, and I think he just like opened up a whole new path for us bass players, you know. So that's why this is so rewarding for me to do this record, because it just, you know, he meant so much to my instrument.
Wow. Okay, so let's listen to, this is a song that, this is a tune that you dedicated to him, that you wrote yourself on this album. This is Scotty's song. Let's have a listen. Wow, gotta love that groove. Okay, so Brian, tell us about you as a band leader now. You chose these musicians who are going to be on this album. Tell us, what do you look for in a musician? What's an important, something that sticks, that you know, I want to play with that person. I want that person on this album.
Well, they have to shower. They have to be clean. No, it's like and the guitar sound on that was actually my piccolo bass. That's a bass guitar that I tune up an octave and a fourth to the register of a guitar. It sounds like a guitar. It's actually a bass, you know. And it was kind of Wes Montgomery on that one. It just the song wrote itself. Interestingly enough, it had chord changes that were kind of similar to Gloria's Step. That's what inspired it. But the musicians, they're everything, right? It's like, you know, it might be my record and I might produce it and arrange it or whatever, but it's who I'm playing with. They're just as important as I am. So the musicians are the key. So Tom Zink on piano and Charles Ruggiero on the drums, they're really, really sensitive. It just, they listen, they care, they have a big heart, they swing, they play their butts off, but they never overplay. They play for the music. And that's why I picked them to be on the record, because playing with Charles, the drummer, you know, he comes from New York. You know, my whole family comes from New York. It's that New York straight ahead jazz feel. You can't really explain it. You just know it when you hear it and play with it. The first time I played with him, within like 2 bars of a song, I knew, oh, he's the cat. Because where the stick hits the cymbal, I call where one is in the same place where my finger plucks the string. So it feels good. It's got that swing. It's got that thing. So that's the glue. You want to have that cohesiveness with the musicians. You want there to be, you know, we're all in it together. So that's the important thing with who is on the record. And we do gigs as a trio live. It's fantastic because it just comes out on stage. There's so much chemistry between the three of us, and it's not 3 guys playing at the same time. It's 3 guys playing together. And there's a big difference between playing at the same time and also playing together as a unit. So that's why these guys on the record. Tom Zink, the pianist, was a huge Bill Evans fan. You know, Scotty was in the Bill Evans trio, so he really loves that music and that approach to playing jazz trio. Bill was a genius in what he did, you know, what Bill did for the acoustic bass player with Scotty and other bass players, you know, after Scotty, was huge. His role in what the acoustic bass with the role of the acoustic bass in the Bill Evans trio was monumental for bass players. So Tom Zink, the pianist, grew up listening to that, understanding that mindset of how Bill would play. So he never overplays. He never gets in my way when I'm soloing. He always supports me musically, lets me do my thing, and still sets a nice, you know, bed for me, you know, and listens to what I'm doing. There's so many musicians that just play, and especially I don't know if you'll understand this, but when you're a bass player, I don't know how else to say this other than it's just kind of the fact. When you're a bass player that plays like me, meaning you have a lot of technical proficiency and you can play fast lines and you're a strong player and you can really do all kinds of different things, whether it's good or bad, doesn't matter. It's the fact that you've got the ability to do all this different stuff. So many pianists do not know how to comp behind a bass solo with a bass player who can play like that. So they end up overplaying because they're afraid of getting lost or they don't know what to do. Tom is the polar opposite. He lets me be me and say what I need to say as a soloist, but he supports me on the ride, and we're in the ride together. He never gets in my way, but he's always there supporting me, and he'll play nice melodic things that affect me, and I'll answer him or I'll play with him. And it's a wonderful thing when a bass player and a piano player can do that together, because if not, you're fighting versus everybody's going on the same journey together. So that's one of the things about him that I love so much, is that he listens and never gets in my way and allows me to do what I do. And then he'll play something that's really cool that will inspire me to go a different direction in my solo. That's what improvisation is. That's what jazz is. So that's why these guys are on the record.
And
Brian, in the band.
And Brian, for the young musicians listening, young people listening, what do you recommend when do they need to be practicing scales? What do young musicians need to be focusing on in order to get that, as you said, that good feel?
Well, it's a good question, and this is kind of an interesting involved and evolved answer. It's like it is impossible to play music on your instrument if you don't know your instrument. Playing an instrument isn't necessarily playing music. You have to know your instrument well enough to be able to make music on it and communicate and tell a story. Sing to me, move me, play something that moves me. I want to feel it. I want to hear a melody. It's impossible to do that if you don't know your instrument well enough to be able to do that. So you have to learn how to play your instrument well enough to then start being able to play the music on the instrument. Scales are incredibly important. Scales teach you where to put your fingers. I don't care what instrument you play, it's all the same. Scales shows you where those notes are. It's impossible to play a note on your instrument if you don't know where to put your finger to make that note. So you've got to learn the rudiments. You need to learn what the notes are. You need to learn the scales. You need to know every note on that instrument. So when you start hearing notes, you know where to put your finger. It's like, oh, I hear a B flat. Boom, I go play a B flat. I don't have to think about it. You just play it. The only way you get to that point is by putting in the practice. And the thing about jazz versus classical, and I love classical music, is, classical music is you're interpreting what somebody else wrote and you're reading notes and you're playing it with your feel, but you're still replicating what someone else did and you're putting your feel into it. You're putting your fingers in the same place every time you play the same passage. With jazz, you go a step farther than that. You understand what the chord change is, and then you improvise and you sing and tell a story over that chord change. You really have to know where those notes are. You have to know how to sing through your instrument, and that's a lifetime of practice and dedication. So, you can build the tallest building in the world if you build a foundation, but you can't start on the 14th floor. You got to build a foundation.
Okay, let's have a listen to This Is Danny Boy. So, Brian, with that brings us to the philosophical portion of this conversation, which I know everyone looks forward to every week. Brian, when we listen to the recordings of the Bill Evans Trio with Scott LaFaro, the most uncharitable description of what is heard might be, quote unquote, cocktail music. The music we hear is fun, feels good, and is thoroughly virtuosic. Just how little attention the musicians demand of their listeners is betrayed by the clients of the Village Vanguard talking loudly, clanking their glasses, and laughing. That may be because rather than addressing the audience, the trio seems preoccupied with communicating between themselves. Musical jokes are commonly exchanged, and Bill Evans even wraps up the performance by playing a few measures of a pseudo-Scarlatti sonata. The trio lacks the sense of urgency we would expect from jazz artists in the early 1960s, such as we hear in Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn. To the contrary, these college-educated white men don't seem to care about anything happening off stage and are quite lighthearted on stage. Now, appearances are misleading and style is not substance. Nevertheless, as your album is a tribute to that trio, one can easily give into the same stereotypes. Someone might say, Brian's trio is all about showing off instrumental technique. That might be one stereotype. So with such a stereotype in mind, I was very surprised when I first met you. As soon as our conversation started, you had to take another call. Once finished, you apologized and told me you live with severe back pain, and that was your doctor calling to schedule an appointment. That surprised me. You had just left home and all proximity to your doctor by crossing the entire USA to attend Pennsylvania's Berks Jazz Festival. It turns out that sharing music with others is what got you through every other challenging time in your life. And today, as you speak to us, sharing music is the only reason you're still making faces at that Goliath called pain. What does music mean to you?
It means everything. And unfortunately, yes, I actually broke my back in December. And I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, but and that was the doctor, after, seeing my MRI report. But anyway, music is it's for me, because I do it, it's my soul, and and the one thing that's cool about this festival is, you see a lot of the same people every year, and you get relationships with the people, and they're not just fans, they're human beings, and they relate to what you do, and they inspire you, and they support you, and they get what you do, which is fuel and inspiration for me to persevere through the pain, and yeah, would certainly be easier for me to just be laying in bed and healing. But that's not living life. I mean, if the doctor says, hey man, you're going to be crippled, that's a different story. But if it's just a matter of dealing with pain, so I'll take some Advil or something, but it just warms my soul to be playing music with people, for people. And it just helps me get through the challenging things in life. And right now, this is a challenging period with an injury that's this bad, but I'm not going to stop until they tell me I have to stop, because it's just too emotionally rewarding, and it just feels too good, to be able to play and have people respond to that. And I need that fuel right now to help get me through, so music is everything. It's a language. The other thing about it that I love so much is that it's a language that has no words, and therefore it's universal. And I don't care what country you are from, what your skin color is, what ethnicity you are, what language you speak, you can all hear music and relate to it on a deeper human level. And it is just global, and it touches people's hearts in completely different ways, in exactly the same way. And that's a beautiful thing. And I just love it. I can't imagine another language being so universal than music.
Hey, let's have, after hearing that, let's watch Brian performing to round up the show. So this is What Is This Thing Called Love, also on the album. Okay, so Brian, what do you wish those who listened to this album?
To be nice to me. Just to get the spirit of what this record is about, why it is what it is, because it's truly it's truly a tribute to Scott LaFaro, and it's just I'm not trying to play like Scott LaFaro. I'm not trying to imitate him. I'm not trying to do. All I'm doing is playing the way I play. I only know how to play one way, and that is it. So I want people to listen to this record with their ears and their heart and not necessarily their mind. Listen to it for what it is versus for what it's not. And I think if you just listen to the fact that it's honest, it's real. We did it live, 2 days, 14 songs we recorded in 2 days in the studio. It's a live jazz record, and just listen to it for the spirit of, you know, three guys playing as good as they possibly can to try to make the nicest music they can, and whatever happens, happens, you know. I just want people to enjoy it for what it is. And it's really meaningful to me to do it. Scott LaFaro's sister, who's in her 80s, is a writer, and she wrote a beautiful part of the liner notes that when she sent it to me, I started crying. I was literally dripping tears on my computer when I read it. To have her involvement in the project and sharing stories about Scott and their family and their dad and the music in the house, it reminded me of my family in a way, and it made me feel so connected to Scott and the music. It made it so much more important than just here's another acoustic jazz trio record. Like, who cares? You know, there's a lot of heart and soul behind this, and that's what made it very special for me. So that's what I want people to get that.
Okay, let's see how they can get the album. So they simply need to go to brianbromberg.com to check out everything. Here's his website.
.net. brianbromberg.net.
Oh, .net, excuse me. I'm sorry, brianbromberg.net, excuse me. And we've got the recordings down here. Got all of his different, all of his CDs. And
yeah, there's tons of stuff. Yeah.
And we can go, Brian, people can reach out to you here at under contact. Is that right? If they've got any questions?
Just Brian at brianbromberg.net. I get my emails, so email me and I'm happy to respond.
Fantastic. Excellent. And again, Amazon, you can find the album there. There it is, $15.99 for the CD.
Yep.
You can find it wherever you get your music.
You can get it on my website. You can stream it. You can, however you want to get it, you can get it.
Perfect. So again, that's brianbromberg.net. Thank you so very much to Brian Bromberg.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's take a look at what's coming up next week on Vienna Live. This is the Future Food Institute. Quote, who's hungry today? Who's still hungry today? Ever since biologist Norman Borlaug led the Green Revolution, matters of food security left the realm of the divine and were placed squarely in man's hands. Humans, not God, were now responsible when someone went hungry. This is especially true in the West, where starvation is now inconceivable and our post-material sensibilities are more concerned about food quality than food quantity. Yet hunger still abounds, and the Future Food Institute is there to respond to it in all its forms. Sara Roversi, president of the Future Food Institute, will introduce us to this extraordinary global organization and show us how great food culture is at the center of a great society. Today, who's still hungry? All of us. Come welcome Sara Roversi, president of the Future Food Institute, to Vienna Live. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simeonmoro.com. Again, that's next Wednesday at the Future Food Institute. Again, thank you so very much to Brian Bromberg. Thank you to Victoria and Frederick Mulligan and Agnieszka Ben-Arguele for their support of this show. Thanks to my cousin Mike, a marketer from LayerHap. If you're an architect or an engineer, they have a really cool tool you should check out. Thanks also to Mary Schlesinger for the lovely Viennese library you can see behind me. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From New London, New Hampshire, and the Berks Jazz Festival in Reading, Pennsylvania, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.
Take care. Thank you.